My name is Emily Nelson. I am 35 years old, a research scientist with 12 years of experience in Seattle, Washington. For most of my life, I lived each day with a single, unshakable conviction: science is my God. I assumed that if you follow the evidence, remain objective, and trust the peer-reviewed reality of the physical world, everything important will eventually be explained. I conducted complex experiments, mapped genetic sequences, and trusted logic to explain everything that mattered. I am telling you this so you understand exactly who is speaking when I say that what happened to me 3 days ago was not a hallucination, not a stress response, not a neurological event born from oxygen deprivation. It was the most real thing I have ever experienced in my life, and I would stake every credential I have ever earned on that statement. March 19th, a Wednesday afternoon. I had spent the morning in the lab, then come home to work in the garden behind my house. I find it grounding, the garden, after a week of analysis and the particular intellectual weight that comes from trying to solve the puzzles of the physical world. There is something tactile about putting your hands in soil. My backyard is modest: a vegetable plot, some raised beds, an old stone well that came with the property when I bought it 5 years ago. The well has been sealed and unused for as long as I have owned the house. I keep meaning to have it properly filled in. I have never gotten around to it. I was reaching for a tool that had slipped from the edge of the raised bed near the well wall when the old stone rim gave way, just like that. No warning, no dramatic crumbling. One moment I was standing in afternoon sunlight. The next I was falling into cold darkness, and the world above me was a shrinking circle of gray sky getting smaller and smaller until it was the size of a coin. The impact knocked the breath out of me. The water at the bottom was shallow, barely 2 feet, but ice cold, and the walls were slick stone with nowhere to grip. I screamed until my voice went raw. I tried to climb and failed. My phone was on the kitchen counter. Nobody knew where I was. I am a scientist and I understand hypothermia with clinical precision, which made the next hour considerably more terrifying because I could track exactly what was happening to my body as the cold worked its way through me. My shivering became uncontrollable. My thinking began to slow. I know the numbers. Core temperature dropping below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, below 90, below 86. I know what those numbers mean for survival. I am told my neighbor, who is a retired school teacher and walks her dog along the fence line every day without fail, heard something she described as a faint sound, like someone calling from underground. She called 911. By the time the fire department pulled me out, I had been in that well for just over 1 hour. My core temperature was dangerously low. My heart had stopped sometime in the final minutes before rescue. The paramedics worked on me for what the records indicate was 14 minutes before they restored a rhythm. Those 14 minutes were not darkness. They were not nothing. They were more vivid and more real than any moment I have lived on the surface of this earth. I did not feel myself leave my body. It was more like the body simply stopped being relevant. One moment I was somewhere cold and black and frightening, and the next I was standing on ground that felt more solid than anything I had ever stood on in my waking life. The air around me held a quality of light I cannot adequately describe with technical terminology or any other language I was trained in. It was not brightness exactly. It was more like clarity, as though my entire life I had been seeing the world through frosted glass and someone had finally wiped it clean. I understood immediately with a certainty that bypassed all my analytical training that I was not alone. He was standing perhaps 30 feet from me, and the distance felt both measureless and intimate at the same time. I have read reports of people experiencing things like this. I have listened with professional detachment and internal skepticism. I have read the literature, the neurological explanations, the theories about endorphin release and temporal lobe activity. None of that framework survived the first second of his presence. His eyes held something I cannot name with any word in any language I know. Wisdom is too small. Love is too common. It was like looking at the origin point of every true thing that has ever existed. I tried to speak and found I did not need to. He already knew everything I might say. "Emily," he said, and my name in his voice was like hearing it spoken for the very first time in its correct pronunciation, as though every person who had ever called my name before had been approximating something they did not quite understand. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions about the nature of existence, about the laws of physics that I had worshipped for so long. He raised one hand gently, the way you might steady someone who has just stood up too quickly, not harsh, patient. "There is something I need you to see," he said. "Not for yourself, for them." Before I could form the question of who he meant, everything around us changed. We were standing in a hospital corridor, and I recognized the particular specific dread of it immediately, because I have spent my career in places that look exactly like this. But something was deeply wrong with what I was seeing. The fluorescent lights above us pulsed with a greenish cast that made everything look slightly decomposed. Gurneys were pushed against every wall. People lay on the floor in the spaces between. The smell reached me even in whatever state I was in. Antiseptic, losing a war against something organic and overwhelming. It was a thick, heavy scent of sickness that bypasses the lungs and goes straight to the stomach. "When?" I asked. "Soon," he said. "Months, not years." A nurse moved past us at a near run, her mask dark with something that had soaked through from the inside. She did not see us. None of them did. We were present without being part of what was unfolding. Witnesses to something that had not happened yet, but carried the weight of inevitability. The way a blood panel can tell you what is coming for a patient before the symptoms fully declare themselves. "It starts small," he continued. "A cluster of cases in Southeast Asia. The news will call it a new strain of influenza. They will be wrong." I watched a young doctor, he could not have been more than 32, slide slowly down a wall until he was sitting on the floor with his face in his hands. He looked like a man who had been awake for days and had just received news that there would be no sleep coming. I recognized that posture. I have seen it in the mirror after a failed experiment that cost a year of work. "This is not like before," he said. And I knew he meant the pandemic that my profession had barely survived. Collectively, this moves faster. It kills differently, and the response will be worse than the disease itself. We passed through walls and doors as though they were suggestions rather than barriers. In one room, a family stood around a bed in full protective equipment, their faces invisible behind layers of plastic and cloth. The person in the bed was not moving. In another, a team worked with the specific frantic energy of people who know they are losing and refuse to accept it. I know that energy from the inside. "Why are you showing me this?" My voice cracked in a way that had nothing to do with cold water. "I am one person in one city. I work with molecules and microscopic sequences. I deal with the ordinary mechanics of life." He turned to face me fully, and the weight of his complete attention was something I felt physically like the pressure change before a major weather system arrives. "The specialists and the administrators," he said, "they will complicate it. They will form committees. They will issue guidance documents while people die in hallways. But you have spent your years looking at the building blocks of life and reading the signs that appear before the obvious symptoms. You know when something is wrong before the numbers confirm it. You know when to act before consensus forms." The hospital dissolved, and we were suddenly in a laboratory facility I did not recognize. It was high security. The kind of place where I have spent much of my life. Scientists were moving with an urgency that bordered on panic. I saw them looking at screens, their brows furrowed. I looked over their shoulders, and what I saw made my heart sink. It wasn't a natural mutation. It was a sequence that had been polished, sharpened, and perfected. It was designed to bypass the very immune responses we spent decades learning how to trigger. I saw the way the illness worked inside a human cell. It didn't just replicate. It hijacked the cellular machinery in a way that left the cell unable to signal for help. It was silent until it was too late. I saw the lungs filling not just with fluid, but with a thick fibrous tissue that the body produced in a misguided attempt to heal itself. People would feel fine one day, a slight cough the next, and by the third day, their lungs would be as stiff as leather. "The origin will be debated," he said, his voice echoing through the sterile lab. "The blame will be shifted from one nation to another. But the truth is that human pride sought to master what it should have respected. They played with the fire of life and expected not to be burned. I saw the vials being packed into cold storage containers. I saw the shipping manifests. I saw the names of cities on the labels. It wasn't just Southeast Asia. I saw boxes destined for Europe, for South America, and for North America. This wasn't a leak. It was a deployment, not necessarily by a single villain, but by a system so convinced of its own safety and brilliance that it had become blind to its own danger. They believe they are protecting their interests, he said. They believe that by controlling the sickness, they control the world. But the sickness has a mind of its own once it is unleashed. We were standing on a street I did not recognize, though it could have been any mid-sized American city. Storefronts empty, windows broken or boarded. A line of people stretched around an entire city block waiting for something, food perhaps, or medicine. Their faces carrying an expression I have only seen on patients who have received a terminal diagnosis and have not yet decided how to respond. The virus is just the beginning, he said quietly. Watch what happens when people get frightened enough. A military vehicle moved down the center of the street, speakers mounted on its roof, broadcasting instructions I could not quite resolve into words. The people in line did not look up. They had already heard everything being said and had stopped processing it. They will offer safety in exchange for compliance. It will seem reasonable at first, logical, even necessary. A new identification system, they will say, for public health, for the protection of the community, for the greater good. His voice carried something I had not heard in it before, a kind of grief that went deeper than any ordinary sorrow. Millions will accept it without question. They will believe the lie because the alternative requires more courage than they feel they have. How do we stop it? I asked. You do not stop it. You prepare for it. You warn the ones who are willing to listen. The scene around us accelerated. Images moving through the air around us like frames from a film being shuffled. I saw families in their living rooms, glued to news reports that flickered with constant updates. I saw the fear in their eyes. I saw the way neighbors began to watch each other, looking for a cough, a sneeze, or any sign of the unclean. I saw the way parents held their children closer, not out of love, but out of a desperate, clutching terror. I saw the digital infrastructure being switched on. I saw the way your phone, your bank account, and your very ability to walk through a door became tied to a single green checkmark on a screen. If the checkmark turned red, the door stayed locked. The grocery store wouldn't open. The bank account would be frozen. It was presented as a way to keep the sick away from the healthy, but I saw it for what it truly was, a leash. The grocery store wouldn't open. The bank account would be frozen. It was presented as a way to keep the sick away from the healthy, but I saw it for what it truly was, a leash. Look at the map, he said. I was suddenly looking at a digital representation of the United States, similar to the tracking systems I use in the lab to follow the spread of a pathogen. 3 points of light pulsed with a rhythmic, threatening intensity. Memphis, Phoenix, Sacramento. I watched as lines of connection began to spiderweb out from these 3 hubs. In my professional life, I have studied how information and biological matter move through a population. This was different. It didn't crawl along highways or hop between major international airports in a linear fashion. It appeared to bloom. When you see those 3 names appearing together in the same news cycle, he explained, that is your confirmed indicator. The experts will call it a coincidence for the first week. They will argue over the statistics. They will look for a common source, a food shipment, a shared event, a specific flight. They will find nothing that fits their models, and while they argue, the window for clear thinking will begin to close. I saw the newsrooms. I saw the polished anchors adjusting their earpieces, their faces tight with a stress they weren't yet allowed to show the public. They were reading scripts that used words like abundance of caution and temporary measures. But behind them, on the monitors, I could see the live feeds from the emergency rooms. It was a nightmare of logistics. The sheer volume of people was one thing, but the specific profile of the illness was what chilled me as a scientist. It was aggressive. It bypassed the usual immune markers. The response will be constructed in stages, he said, and the vision shifted to show the progression of the coming year. Each stage will be presented as a logical, necessary reaction to an extraordinary situation. This is how they build the infrastructure for what is to come. They will not ask for everything at once. They will ask for small, defensible concessions. I saw the first stage. mandatory testing. I watched as temporary structures were erected in the parking lots of malls, schools, and stadiums. They were clean, white, and efficient. I saw thousands of people standing in line, holding their identification, waiting for a swab. It was presented as a civic duty, a way to protect the vulnerable. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, the speakers on the walls would drone. I saw the way people nodded, their faces hidden behind masks, their eyes filled with a desperate need to believe that this would be the end of it. Then came the second stage, digital contact tracing. I saw the push notifications appearing on millions of phones simultaneously. An application that could not be deleted, a system that tracked every person you passed in the street, every door you entered, every person you spoke to for more than 30 seconds. If your phone buzzed red, you were barred from your workplace. You were barred from the pharmacy. You were barred from your own community. I watched as people began to police each other. I saw a man in a grocery store being shouted down by his neighbors because his phone had emitted the wrong tone. The social fabric was tearing, not from the illness itself, but from the fear of being excluded from the system. By late summer, he said, his voice steady against the images of growing unrest, the framework will be in place in every major metropolitan area. They will have normalized the idea that your health status is a matter of public record, and that your freedom of movement is a privilege granted by the state based on your compliance. I saw the third stage, movement tracking. I watched as checkpoints were established at the borders of cities and states. To pass, you had to scan a code on your device. I saw the frustration of travelers, the long lines of cars, the armed guards who looked just as tired and frightened as the people they were monitoring. The language used by the officials changed. It was no longer about health. It was about security and stability. And then, he said, his expression becoming heavier than I had seen it yet, comes the solution. They will wait until the population is at its breaking point. They will wait until the economy has ground to a halt and the shelves are empty. They will wait until people are willing to trade anything for a return to the world they remember. The scene changed to a high-tech facility. It looked like the kind of place where I have spent my career, sterile, advanced, and filled with the promise of progress. I saw scientists holding a small vial. Inside was a substance that shimmered with a faint, iridescent quality. This is what they will call the breakthrough, he said. The quantum identification chip. It is the marriage of medicine and monitoring. I looked at the technical details of the device as if I were reading a research paper. As a scientist, I could see the elegance of the engineering. It was a bio-integrated sensor, small enough to be delivered through a simple procedure. It didn't just store information, it interfaced with the body's own nervous system. It could monitor enzyme levels, heart rate, and even certain neurotransmitters in real time. It would verify your identity, your health status, and your financial accounts in a single scan. One simple procedure, a voice on a screen in the vision promised, and the world opens back up to you. No more tests, no more checkpoints, no more fear. You can work, you can travel, you can provide for your family. Everything returns to normal. I watched as the first groups of people received it. It took less than 30 seconds. They walked out of the clinics with a look of immense relief. They went straight to the stores. They scanned their hands, and the doors slid open. They bought food. They went back to their jobs. On the surface, it looked like a triumph of human ingenuity over a global crisis. But look closer, Emily, he said. I looked at the people who had taken the chip. I looked at their eyes. My training in neurology and cellular biology allowed me to see what the average person could not. The chip was not a passive observer. It was an active modulator. It was tuned to specific frequencies that interacted with the part of the brain responsible for deep conviction and spiritual awareness. It didn't turn people into robots, but it dampened the noise of the soul. It made them more suggestible, more compliant, and less capable of feeling that internal friction that happens when you are asked to do something that violates your conscience. The biological cost is high, I whispered, looking at the way the neural pathways were being subtly rerouted. It severs the connection to the higher self. It turns the human being into a closed loop, unable to receive anything from outside the system. It is a permanent decision, he said. Those who accept it with full knowledge of what they are choosing are crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. They are trading their eternal essence for temporary comfort. I saw the clinics being rolled out on a massive scale. I saw the advertisements that made those who refused look like monsters, like people who wanted the world to stay sick. For the protection of the community, the slogan said. For the children, for the future. I saw the pressure being applied to those who hesitated. If you didn't have the chip, you couldn't pay your rent. You couldn't buy medicine for your parents. You couldn't even enter a public park. The system was designed to be total. It wasn't about a virus anymore. It was about who owned the human being. How do we live? I asked. How do those who refuse survive in a world that has locked them out? That is why I'm showing you the refuge, he said. The vision shifted again, moving away from the gray, sterile cities and toward the wild, open spaces of the north and the west. I saw a landscape that felt like a breath of fresh air after the suffocation of the hospital corridors. The 5 regions, he said, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, the Dakotas, and Hawaii. I have placed a covering over these lands. It is not a shield against all hardship, but it is a place where my protection will be tangible for those who act with faith. I saw the first of the states, Montana. I was looking at the northwestern corner, near the Canadian border. Towns like Libby, Eureka, and Troy. I saw the mountains rising like ancient guardians. I saw families arriving in old trucks, their belongings piled high. They weren't looking for luxury. They were looking for ground they could stand on. I saw them building simple homes, planting gardens that were designed for survival rather than beauty. The wilderness here is an ally, he explained. The systems of control depend on high-density infrastructure. They depend on the grid, the network, the constant flow of digital information. In these mountains, the system falters. The geography itself creates a barrier. I watched a group of people in a small valley. They were working together to dig a well. There was no electricity, but they had figured out a way to pump the water using a simple mechanical system. I saw them sharing tools, sharing food, and most importantly, sharing their strength. There was no noise of the city here. There was only the sound of the wind in the pines and the steady rhythm of people building a life. The window for getting to these places is this summer, he warned. Once the leaves begin to turn and the air grows cold, the enforcement will accelerate. Travel will no longer be a matter of simply buying a ticket or driving down the road. They will begin to ask for the mark at every turn. If you wait until you are certain of the danger, you will have waited too long. The vision moved to Wyoming. I saw the eastern plains, the rolling hills near Sheridan and Buffalo. It was a vast, open country that many people ignore. But I saw the value in that openness. I saw communities forming in the folds of the land, invisible to the satellite surveillance that would soon dominate the urban skies. They were raising cattle, growing hardy grains, and establishing a system of exchange that didn't involve a single digital transaction. Low population density means fewer resources for enforcement, he said. The authorities will focus their energy on the cities first. They will secure the hubs and the ports. These open lands will be the last places they look, and by the time they do, the communities here will have roots that they cannot easily pull up. I saw a man standing on a ridge in Wyoming, looking out over the horizon. He wasn't afraid. He was prepared. He had a look of peace that I hadn't seen on a single face in the cities. He knew that the coming winter would be hard, but he also knew that he was standing on ground that belonged to something greater than the system. He knew that the coming winter would be hard, but he also knew that he was standing on ground that belonged to something greater than the system. The perspective shifted again, moving across the mountain peaks toward the northern panhandle of Idaho. I saw the region around Bonner's Ferry and Sandpoint. It carried that same quality of golden radiance I had seen over the Montana locations. The mountains and dense forests here acted as natural barriers, but more than that, I saw the spirit of the people already living there. They were individuals who already understood the value of independence. They wouldn't look at those arriving with suspicion, but with the recognition of shared preparation. Idaho will reach capacity fastest, he warned. because it is already known as a place for those who seek distance from the reach of the city. By late summer, the awareness of what is coming will have spread enough that the land will be difficult to obtain. Those who wait for the news to confirm their fears will find that others have already filled the spaces. I watched as communities in the Idaho forests began to establish small-scale logging operations and communal kitchens. They were creating a society that felt older and more honest. I saw children playing in the woods, far from the screens and scanners of the cities. They were being taught how to identify medicinal plants and how to track the weather by the movement of the clouds rather than an application on a device. The 3 states, Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, form a triangle of protection, he explained. They are close enough to support one another, to share resources when one has a surplus and another has a need. But they are remote enough to make the logistics of enforcement a nightmare for the authorities. The system thrives on concentration. It fails in the face of scattered, self-sufficient strength. Then the vision pulled me eastward, over the Great Divide and into the wide open spaces of the Dakotas, particularly the western regions. North Dakota near the Montana border and the Black Hills of South Dakota. I saw agricultural land that stretched to the horizon, but it wasn't the industrial farming I was used to seeing from the air. This was something different. I saw people learning to work the land with methods that predated the heavy reliance on complex machinery and chemical fertilizers. The Dakotas offer what the mountains cannot, he said. Productive land at scale. These regions will function as the agricultural foundation for the entire northern network. When the urban supply chains collapse and the grocery stores in the cities become places of desperation, these farms will be producing abundance. But it requires the knowledge of the soil, the saving of seeds, and the willingness to work with the seasons rather than against them. I saw people in North Dakota preserving food in underground cellars. I saw them drying meat and storing grains in ways that didn't require refrigeration. They were preparing for a winter where the power grid might be a memory. There was a sense of purpose in their movements. They weren't just surviving. They were building a reservoir of life for those who would eventually flee the cities with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The contrast will be stark, he continued. In the cities, people will be starving in the midst of technology. In the refuge, people will be thriving in the midst of simplicity. The system will try to paint these communities as dangerous, as lawless, as the cause of the very problems the system created. But the truth will be visible to anyone with eyes to see. The vision shifted one final time, moving far across the ocean to the islands of Hawaii. I was confused. As a scientist, I knew how much the islands depended on shipping for every basic necessity. The isolation is the point, he said, answering my unspoken thought. When the mainland descends into total enforcement, the distance of the ocean creates a barrier that the authorities cannot easily bridge. The very thing that makes Hawaii vulnerable in a global economy makes it protected in a time of total control. I saw small communities on the outer islands, Kauai, the remote parts of the Big Island, and Molokai. They were positioning themselves far from the military bases and the tourist hubs of Oahu. They were reviving the ancient ways of the land, the fish ponds, and the mountain gardens. They were living as a single family. Those who choose the islands must arrive ready, he said. They must bring the tools and the knowledge to be entirely self-sufficient from the moment they step onto the sand. The ocean protects, but it also means there is no retreat. You commit to the islands, and you make them work through faith and labor. I saw all 5 regions at once, glowing like embers in a darkening room. I saw the lines of connection between them, not digital lines, but spiritual ones. There was a sense of peace over these lands that made my heart ache. Why 5? I asked. Because that is what is needed to preserve the remnant, he said. More would dilute the protection. Fewer would concentrate the people too much. These 5 have the geography, the resources, and the spiritual covering necessary to endure what is coming. But then the scene changed back to the cities, and I saw the darkness of the winter to come. I saw the clinics again, the ones providing the quantum identification chip. I saw the people standing in line, their breath visible in the cold air. They looked exhausted. They looked like people who had been beaten down by months of fear, shortages, and constant monitoring. The real test is not the sickness, he said. The response to the sickness is the test. It is what people will agree to accept when they are frightened enough. The chip is the final step in a long process of saying yes to the wrong things because they feel easier than saying no. I saw a woman in a city apartment. She was looking at her children, who were hungry. She had a choice on the screen in front of her. Accept the mark, and the fridge would be filled by morning. Refuse it, and stay in the cold. I saw her hand tremble. This is the pressure, he said. It is designed to find the weak point in every person. It is not a broad, blunt force. It is a precise application of weight to the place where you are most likely to break. For some, it is the fear of hunger. For others, it is the fear of being alone. For many, it is simply the desire for things to be normal again. I looked at the eyes of those who had already taken it. There was a flatness there, a lack of the light that indicates a soul is present. They were going through the motions of life, working, eating, talking, but the spark was gone. They were like a building with the lights on, but no one inside. The chip severs the connection, he said. It doesn't just track the body, it claims the spirit. Once it is accepted with full knowledge, the capacity to hear my voice is lost. The decision becomes permanent in a way that physical death is not. And those who cannot leave? I asked, my heart breaking for the millions I saw trapped in the urban grids. What happens to the faithful who are stuck in the cities, who have no way to reach the mountains or the islands? His expression softened, and the light around him seemed to pulse with a deep, comforting warmth. I have never abandoned my people. Location is a tool, not a requirement for my presence. Some are called to the refuge to build the foundations for the future. But others are called to stay exactly where they are, to be a light in the deepest darkness. He showed me a small group of people in an urban basement. They were praying together, sharing what little food they had. They didn't have the mark. They were invisible to the system's sensors, not because of technology, but because of a covering that the system couldn't comprehend. I saw an old man giving his last piece of bread to a child. I saw a young woman singing a hymn in a voice so quiet it could barely be heard, yet it filled the room with a power that the city scanners could never detect. Some will be sustained by miracles that the scientists will never be able to explain, he said. They will have enough because I am enough. Others will be called to give their lives as a final testimony. Their reward will be the crown of those who held their faith when the cost was everything. Both paths lead back to me. No one who trusts in me is ever truly lost. The weight of the timeline began to press in on me. March, April, May, the months were moving like a countdown. Tell them the time is short, he said. Tell them that the choice they make this summer will determine their path for the winter. The window is open now, but it is closing. Those who act with decisiveness will find the way made smooth. Those who wait for the world to tell them what to do will find themselves trapped in a net they didn't see being cast. I saw a vision of the news cycles. I saw the names Memphis, Phoenix, and Sacramento scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I saw the experts on television, the scientists I used to admire, explaining away the anomalies. I saw the public nodding along, grateful for any explanation that allowed them to stay comfortable for one more day. The numbers will be manipulated, he said. The evidence will be hidden. But the signs are already present for those who know how to read the world with more than just their eyes. You have seen the sequences in the lab. You have seen the patterns in the clinics. You know. The light began to shift, becoming more intense and yet more distant at the same time. I felt a pulling sensation, as if the gravity of the physical world was finally remembering my name. The refuge states are prepared, he said, his voice echoing, as if from a great distance. The timeline is set. Every sacrifice made now will be seen as nothing compared to the glory that is coming, but they must hold. Only those with roots that go all the way down will stand when the world shakes. The final image I saw was the moment of the great return. It wasn't a slow event. It was a flash of reality that made the previous months of hardship vanish like a bad dream upon waking. I saw the people from the mountains, from the plains, from the islands, and from the hidden basements of the cities, They were rising, their faces filled with a joy that I cannot find the words to describe. "Every tear will be wiped away," he said. "The suffering is temporary. The reward is eternal. Tell them I am coming, and they need to be ready." The brilliant environment began to fade. The ground beneath my feet, which had felt more solid than granite, started to soften. The clarity of the air was replaced by a familiar, heavy cold. I felt the sharp, agonizing pain of my chest being compressed. I heard the rhythmic thumping of a machine and the sharp, clipped voices of people using the language of my old life. "We have a rhythm," someone shouted. "She's back. 14 minutes, but she's back." I opened my eyes to the harsh, artificial lights of the emergency room. A paramedic was leaning over me, his face a mask of sweat and relief. I tried to speak, to tell him about the light, about the cities, about the choice that was coming, but my throat was a desert. I could only watch as they wheeled me through the corridors I had just seen in a different light. That was 3 days ago. I have spent the time since then writing this, ignoring the protests of the doctors who want to run more tests on my heart. They look at the numbers and see a recovery they can't quite explain. I look at the calendar and see a deadline that the world isn't ready for. My training as a scientist tells me that I should look for a rational explanation, that the 14 minutes of oxygen deprivation created a vivid dream. But my soul knows better. I have seen the sequences. I have seen the mark. I have seen the refuge. I am a scientist, and I have spent my life seeking the truth. I have found it, and it isn't something that can be measured in a lab. The condition is serious. The timeline is short. The treatment requires action taken now, while the treatment is still accessible. What you do with that information is between you and him. I have done my part. I have told you exactly what I was shown. If you stayed with me until this moment, thank you. I truly believe you were meant to hear this. Before you go, write in the comments where you are watching from, so I can keep you and your nation in my prayers. If this message spoke to your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And please share this with someone you care about. Sometimes a single message is all it takes to awaken a soul and lead a heart back to Jesus.